Welcome to the Low Carb MD podcast. No one is beyond help. No one is beyond hope.
As we have always said, we are bringing you medical information and cutting-edge science, but none of this is medical advice. Please seek out input from your own doctor.
Hello and welcome back to the Low Carb MD podcast. I'm solo today. Tro's out doing fun stuff with his family. I guess he's trying to be a good dad and husband. He's turning a new leaf, I guess, for 2023. No, I'm just kidding. Anyways, we have an old friend of the show, Raphael Sirtoli, Raphael, but we go by Rafi here, I think.
That's right. Hi,
Welcome,
Brian.
man.
Thanks for having me.
Good to have you back.
Yeah, it's been a while.
We could talk about Tro for a while. We could pick on people. It's just me and you, so. But you got give people your background who don't know if they haven't listened to our previous episode of the podcast.
Yeah, well, we know each other from Twitter. That's how I know a lot of my low carb people and nutrition people, science people. And basically, my background is I have a master's in molecular biology. I was a PhD candidate in neuroscience, health sciences. And now I'm working as a chief scientific officer for Clínica Pêro, which is a medical clinic in Lisbon. So that's really fun. I get to work with our medical director, Dr. Diana Pessoa. She's an oncology specialist, so she specializes in cancer. But in this clinic, she's doing general practice, and I'm supporting her in that role, helping her with research, blood work, discussing, patient decisions around patients. So it's a really great opportunity for people to get a different kind of medicine, one that's a bit more personalized.
Yeah, it's so important. I think we've dropped the ball on that. The doctors say we just run the show, we do it all, and then some of the education people are getting is terrible. And so having someone like you who has a solid science background, and I know you're a curious guy, you're an entrepreneur, you do a lot of stuff out there trying to help people, really. And so I know you're dipping your hands in a lot of different areas. So let's start with seed oils, man. Educate us a little bit on that, because some people go, no, it doesn't mean anything, and others of us say, yeah, it does make a difference.
Yeah, well, I work with a company that sells low linoleic acid, so low omega-6 linoleic acid seed oil product. And the idea behind what that company is doing is to provide an alternative to seed oils that are often used to fry foods. And their oil is high in the kind of fat that you get in olive oil, oleic acid. The idea behind that is that you avoid this inflammatory linoleic acid, omega-6 fatty acid. And so I just want to bring that up front if I'm going to talk about the subject. So the big thing about this topic is that this food is in everything, right? This food-like stuff, this oil that's extracted, heated, it's transformed into some not very nice molecules. We can talk about that as well. And it's a big health problem. It affects obesity, cancer, fatty liver disease, and it's also inflammatory. So I think that having a product that people can enjoy, in addition to the options we already have, like butter, lard, olive oil, all of that good stuff, I think it's great, because the more people we can get off the vegetable oils, the more people we're going to help. Some people will be happy doing it with, butter and olive oil, and other people will want like a more liquid oil that has a neutral taste that they can use for a variety of reasons. So I think the more options we have, that's great. It's just like there were more and more keto products out there for people to adopt the diet and adhere to it. Well, I'm all for it. I think we have to be practical. So I think seed oils are a big issue, just like I think carbs are a big issue as well. And together, they're basically fast food. They're that combination.
Exactly. And it's the same people who are eating their big bag of potato chips and saying, you're eating a steak, you're going to kill yourself. Like, well, do you know what kind of oil is in those, what you're eting, all the snacks and all the things? Right. It's hidden everywhere. It's ubiquitous, and so with this process, how do they eliminate the omega-6, or how do they do that? Because a lot of us do talk about the omega-3 omega-6 ratios and getting that better. Mm-hmm. And certain foods are going to be higher, salmon or grass-fed beef maybe.
Yeah.
How do they do that?
Well, they do it through bacterial fermentation. So just like you have wine, wine or beer, you produce it with the help of bacteria, basically, in small cells, that produce these fatty acids that give these different tastes, and they have these different properties. And so basically it's through, just like people wrangle sheep, well, they wrangled cells to get them to produce a lot of oleic acid. And so they can have this oil with very low amounts of linoleic acid. And this oil is feeding off, plant matter, basically. The bacteria feeding off plant matter, sorry, and they're producing these oils. And the idea is to not have these big monocrop, fields that take up a lot of space and land and kill a lot of wildlife, to produce an oil that's gonna, hurt us, be inflammatory. The idea is to do it on less land with less water and be able to control the fatty acid profile and to put it into a product that's practical, more practical than maybe solid fats, where some pastry you're going to do with, some baking you're going to do with butter, some other, kind of cooking you're going to do with another kind of fat. So this is just another option for people to consider and make just a healthier choice overall.
Yeah, and just even if they added that into products that they're making, bars and all these other things, it may be a lot better option for people. Is it actually out now as a product that people can buy?
Yeah, it's out. It's at ZeroAcreFarms.com. And I think they're doing a seed oil free challenge in January, which I encourage everyone to do. We did with the medical clinic, we did a CGM challenge over a couple of weeks where we were taking readings and learning about our reactions to different food. And I think this is another great challenge. Just learn to get seed oils out of your diet. So both of these things are, very practical, and people can, they can witness improvements. It's not just that you can measure your blood sugar and get an objective number, how you're responding to different foods. You can do it with seed oils. You probably, like a lot of people, have some symptoms. Maybe it's digestive discomfort, maybe it's a skin issue, maybe it's a mood disorder. Something can improve by removing those elements from your diet. So I think it's worth giving it a try.
Yeah, and fatty liver disease. There's so many things that we're starting to see. Say, gosh, if you make these changes, because I've been kind of astounded by people go on more of a carnivore type diet, and I see their numbers improve dramatically, and their mood, and their energy, and their focus, gut health, eczema. I've seen it. I thought, wow, what is the mechanism? And it's you wonder how much of it is whether the meat is adding something or getting rid of the seed oil is taking away the bad stuff.
Yeah, if you think of I like to think of French fry. It's this perfect combination double hit of flour that raises insulin. And then you have linoleic acid, which when it acts on fat cells, it sensitizes them to the action of insulin. So you get this hit from both sides, right? You get the insulin secretion that increases, and then you get your fat cell that's like very sensitive to this increased insulin. And this creates really, I think, a perfectly fattening inflammatory combo that I think most people are hip to now. They get that French fries are not a health food. I think, even the most ardent nutritionists will admit that it's not a good idea, maybe for the wrong reasons, but even they will admit that. And I think it has to do with the seed oils and the insulin stimulating flour. That's part of it.
No, plus the addictive nature, right? You're not going to eat how many hard-boiled or baked potatoes you're going to eat compared to French fries. It's just that how palatable. Tro talks a lot about that, and I think we're learning more of this addiction thing. And I've sit there and watch people eat French fries, and it's a disaster. You could put down a lot of French fries really quickly without even thinking about it.
Yeah, definitely. And actually, there's another product. So I mentioned the French fry, but there's another product that's in my mind and also near and dear to my heart, because I recently have a newborn baby. And so, of course, I'm thinking of formula and breastfeeding and fatty acids and what's good and what's not. And looking into it, it's incredible. The amount of carcinogens that are in infant formula, because they come with vegetable oils. Vegetable oils are like the main fat, basically, in infant formula. So for infant that can't breastfeed or that won't breastfeed, that's terrible. We have a level of carcinogens that are, sometimes multiple times higher than the standards that we have in Europe, for instance. And this is a big issue. I think it's a massive issue that's sort of under the radar. It's not very interesting for some reason. They still get away with it. We see contamination levels of these carcinogens in infant formula that should scare parents away from using it. And yeah, it's like I said, it's in everything. You know, every carby food, every takeout, every fast food, we have these vegetable oils. And yeah, it's just a real big problem with infants because we see kids getting fatter so quickly, and we can't ascribe a lack of willpower to an infant. So it's one of these scenarios where we're forced to admit that it's not about counting calories. It's really about the quality of the foods that your body is taking in.
Yeah, and being in Portugal, I mean, aren't people healthier there in general? Aren't they eating a more real food diet as it compared to the US?
Yeah, compared to the US, they definitely have a better diet, but they are also seeing, you know, increases in obesity and heart disease and psychiatric disorders because, you know, food around the world looks more the same now. You know, we're copying what works. These are market mechanisms, and Portugal is just going to play into that market at its own rate, quicker or slower than different countries, but it's happening there as well. They have seed oils. I saw margarine everywhere when I was in Portugal. They were pushing that really hard in the big supermarkets. You know, they have wonderful alternatives. I guess the alternatives are more plentiful than they are in the States, but in the end, it's this. We have these same terrible products that line the supermarket aisles and are a big concern for us.
Yeah, and I've been surprised everywhere I've traveled in the world doing volunteer work. You're going to see Kentucky Fried Chicken. You're going to see McDonald's. You're going to see
Right.
all the fast food
Yeah.
restaurants are everywhere. It's stunning.
Yeah, well, they make a lot of money. You know, they make a lot of money. They've got this down to a science nearly. How they serve people, how they market it, the combinations of macronutrients and flavor enhancers. It's all geared towards making you consume this thing that is not nourishing you. And fundamentally, that's an issue where, you know, we have to let people have the freedom to choose what they want to eat, but the information about, you know, what these foods will do to them or likely to do to them, that should not be messed with due to profit or some other incentive. That is sacred in a sense. And I think people will more often than not make the right choice if they're properly informed. You know, people are imperfect, but generally it really helps to be properly informed. We see it all the time. That's why you and I talk about empowering patients, because we know it's not just about prescribing, it's also about educating, providing them with material, stuff to listen to, stuff to read, making sure that they're comfortable asking you a question or even challenging you, someone with authority, either with a medical degree or a scientific degree. So it's all of that that has to go into helping people, you know, make better choices.
Why do you suppose there's so many people attacking? I see, you know, Tucker Goodrich and you know, you guys are talking about seed oils, and some doctors are saying these guys are nuts, that they're fringe, they have no idea what they're talking about. What do you say to these people?
Well, I say that if it's skepticism, then I applaud it. If it's if it's dismissive or if it's based on something personal, then I say that they're missing out, because there's something that they could learn here that they could tell people about and actually get them better results. Because this is not about macronutrients, dietary camps. This is about really looking at when these things were introduced. Look at the timeline, right? Look at when these diseases started. Look to see if they have a mechanism in cells. Look to see if they have, you know, results in rats that we can then go and verify in humans. It's all along the chain. I mean, don't get me wrong, there are pieces that we don't understand, that don't fit. We need better trials to separate the fattening properties, for example, of linoleic acid versus carbohydrates. I think there's stuff that's still unclear there, but generally there's a really good case that they're fattening. They're a major part of the diet. It's a big change. You know, the proportion, like more than 1,000-fold increase in consumption of soybean oil, you know, in this century. I mean, we're talking something that just basically didn't exist in any practical consideration. So yeah, those people are missing out on a big part of the story. I think we have to get those pieces to start helping most people, because at the moment we're only helping, you know, people who are particularly well informed or curious or have the finances to go and, you know, pay out of pocket for certain things. And we want to get that message to people who maybe can't and just going to have to figure it out themselves.
Yeah, and being able to buy oils that are good, things that you could just supplement your diet with that would help, taking out the bad stuff. And then, I'd be curious, have you done any research in, the microbiome or these bacteria, how much of an impact they have on health? Because, one of the things we're looking on the other side of the colon as metabolic health practitioners, we're saying, okay, look, does it spike insulin? For instance, artificial sweeteners, there's some talk that, okay, it may not have as much of an effect on the insulin and spikes and things like that, but it could have a huge effect on the gut microbiome. Alcohol has a huge effect on gut microbiome. Alcohol kills off some of the good bacteria. So you wonder how many people, once they change their diet, that their microbiome just gets better and they could fight off infection better. And I don't know if you've looked into that area at all.
It's one of my favorite topics since I first studied microbiology in my master's degree at Staffordshire in the UK. I really liked it because it was kind of like I was imagining these little alien spaceships doing battle with each other. They have all these different weapons, and bacteria, they can do something really cool, which is horizontal gene transfer. So they can trade genes, they can trade superpowers, if you will, skills. In a way that we can't. We do this through reproduction. It takes super long, it's messy and all that. They just do it like, super fast. They evolve super fast. And it's a very complex system to understand. And one of the first, I think, takeaways I had from the topic was that, and this is true in medicine generally, but especially with the microbiome stuff, making sure you can really identify the direction of causality between two events. Is it the microbiome that's changing and improving the symptoms, or are the symptoms improving and then there's a following change in the microbiome that reflects that? And it's actually really hard to tease out. It's not always easy.
And you can hit it from both sides too, right? You could say, okay, let me try to eat stuff that's gonna, kefir, kimchi, things like that's gonna put in some good bacteria, homemade yogurt, and then watch the stress level. Do things on the other side of it also that can affect the gut, because we have data, like just looking at colitis, for instance, really interesting the correlations with stress levels and poor diet, and people change that and they get better. I know several people who put their colitis in remission with lifestyle change without drugs. I mean, they were on drugs initially, but then sooner or later they came off their drugs. It's amazing.
Yeah, it's incredible. My friend Nick Norwitz, that had a severe case of ulcerative colitis where he ended up in the hospital, and thanks to a ketogenic diet and other appropriate changes to his diet and lifestyle, he made massive improvements. I mean, he really went into remission. And I myself have ulcerative colitis, but a milder version than Nick had, fortunately. And I've had to transition to a mostly meat and fish and dairy-based diet, so a mostly carnivorous diet. And that improved my symptoms. It didn't cure it completely or put it into remission, but it improved a lot of symptoms. So I also had, samples of my colon taken to check that the histopathology was good, that there was no degeneration of tissue, and that seems to have halted. So there were no signs of that. So I think it's really encouraging. I think it's one of these tools that totally underused. Very few people know about it, and a lot of the people who do know about it think it's crazy. But there's a lot of sense to it because we evolved to eat a lot of meat. That's really the elephant in the room here. People don't want to hear, but it's true. We really evolved to eat a lot of meat, fish, animal, protein and fat. And fiber was a minor part of our diet. It wasn't a major part of our diet. We don't have the anatomy to support a very high fiber diet. We need an energy dense diet, a nutrient dense diet, because that's how our guts are shaped and that's how they're made to absorb it right. So carnivore and keto is powerful for ulcerative colitis and other digestive disorders. And I'm sure that digestive disorders like we see at our medical clinic, for you probably see a lot of digestive issues, and you're always like, well, have you tried eliminating this or trying a low carb, keto, or carnivore? Because they help a lot.
Yeah, just I think it's and like what you're talking about with the omega-6, this high pro-inflammatory diet that we're on, if you cause a lot of inflammation in the colon, then you start getting autoimmune issues too, right? Where you get the gut microbiome disrupted and the mucus layer gets destroyed, and then all of a sudden your body starts attacking itself. This leaky gut that me as a Western doc, I laughed about for years. These guys are idiots, and then you start saying, oh my gosh. I mean, I've seen cases that are astounding where someone goes, they we put them on, if they have a parasite, for instance, and we treat them for the parasite and their gut lining is screwed up, they could get depressed, anxious, like really like miserable until we fix the gut. Sometimes we give them a little activated charcoal or something to help wash this lipopolysaccharide. I don't know if you've heard of that or studied that, but how much of an effect it could have on the mood and inflammation throughout the body and autoimmune issues. It's pretty astounding.
Yeah, and so you mentioned lipopolysaccharide, and since we're talking about lifestyle interventions that often don't cost a lot of money and can even save you money, well, here's another one. There was this experiment where they took these people who had learned a breathing technique called hypercapnic hyperventilation. It's also known as the Wim Hof method. It's the Iceman guy who does this funny breathing to stay in the ice, freezing water for minutes and at a time. So basically, they put these guys in the hospital beds. They injected lipopolysaccharides, which is this outer shell of a kind of bacteria that the body recognizes and has these protective immune responses against. And they injected this lipopolysaccharide into these guys. And through this breathing technique, what they managed to do was to essentially neutralize all of the symptoms that come from having this injected into you. You basically develop fever, nausea, headaches, like nasty stuff, like you have a bacterial infection, like your body is fighting and it feels bad. These guys could basically neutralize it with the breath. And the funny thing is that after demonstrating this, they had to rewrite textbooks because this was demonstrated in the Netherlands. That no, actually with proper conscious breathing, you can affect the so-called autonomous nervous system that acts on its own. It doesn't need you to think about the action to do stuff, right? Like when your heart beats and you're digesting food, all this happens without you saying, hey, stomach, hey, heart, beat and move stuff through me. So, textbooks are getting rewritten. There's very cheap stuff that has very powerful effects. This is a very potent immunoprotective effect, that's very repeatable. It's, doesn't take a lot of learning. You don't learn this over weeks. You learn this over hours or days to breathe this way. And it's just showing you that there's a lot that you can do just with modulating your breath and your food and your light and all of that stuff, which is free and doesn't require drugs or expensive programs.
Yeah, and you don't realize I just grabbed this because Bitten Johnson and I were talking, and this is they call it like relaxator, right? And all it is,
right.
She would have panic attacks all the time. And so she said she just started doing this when she would see all of her emails and get stressed out, just slowing her breathing out. She couldn't do it consciously, but when she just used a little device like that, it made a huge difference for her. Panic attacks went away. She talked about it publicly. But things like that where you don't realize people are walking around stressed, tense all the time, eating terrible food to calm their nerves, and just doing something simple like, let me just breathe for a minute, let me just take a breath, let me just relax and do these kind of things that can have some benefit. But it's so outside of our Western way of thinking that we just don't consider it. You think about all the Asian communities doing Tai Chi and doing all these different exercises to relax. There's a benefit to that.
Yeah, it's a pillar of health. There's temperature. That's one we don't really think about much, but there are studies where they've put diabetics, they've exposed diabetics to the cold over 10 days, hours a day, where they're, let's see, what were the temperatures? They were basically like a cold winter in a t-shirt, so you could stay outside, but it was kind of chilly, basically. And so with that sort of exposure over about 10 days, their insulin sensitivity improved something like, I think it was 43%. I mean, we're talking figures that there are no drugs that you can prescribe that will do that, improve your insulin sensitivity by that much. And it's very safe. In fact, exposing to yourself to the cold also improves your immune response to cold viruses, COVID, influenza, all that stuff. So there's a lot of benefits here that's again free, and that's just part of your environment, and learning that you can get a lot of benefit there. And it's just amazing that we don't tell people that there's stuff like that they can do. A lot of people have a lake next to their house they could just go to dip into, learn to breathe properly, come out and get massive cardiovascular benefits because they're training their circulatory system, and they don't have to be an athlete. Like, especially maybe if you're old or if you have a mobility issue and you have trouble running or doing other stuff, well, you can still train your cardiovascular system with breath work and exposure to cold and heat.
Yeah, and heat, that's the other thing. Sauna, infrared sauna, there's a lot of talk about that now with prevention of dementia, cardiovascular disease, COPD, help with that. It's really interesting. There's so many modalities that we just don't consider, and that may be something for someone who's just starting out. Say, let me, start out cold and, just put one foot in the cold, and just slowly build up your tolerance to that.
Yeah, just start with cold showers where you start with warm water and then you just say, okay, for 5 seconds at the end, I'm just going to turn on the cold water. And the next day it's 10 seconds. And you keep going until you realize that you can generate a lot of temperature internally. And the way your body does that is it uses mitochondria and it uses shivering, basically, even though when you do that breathing technique properly, you shouldn't be shivering, you'll just be generating a lot of internal heat. And that's because your mitochondria are uncoupling. It's basically like, if you have a stick shift and you just, press down on the pedal and accelerate, you're not going to be moving forward because you've got the clutch down. But you're generating a lot of heat, a lot of energy, and that's kind of what you learn to do with this.
Yeah, you're uncoupling, right? Uncoupling the energy, and some people are talking about ketogenic diet doing that also, where you're uncoupling the energy supply. It's really interesting because it was interesting because I've over the years my kids were swimmers, so I would notice these long distance female swimmers in particular, and you look at them and go, they're kind of big, for swimming across the English Channel. But I'm wondering, and I don't know that this has been looked at. You're into the science more than I am, but I'm wondering if they have a predominance of subcutaneous fat for buoyancy and for warmth, and their visceral fat is very low. So metabolically, they would be very healthy, even though on the outside they look bigger than other people.
Yeah, I mean, they're going to be doing an activity that uses up a lot of calories, because being in water, even water that's not cold, uses a lot of calories. Swimmers are notorious for how many calories they burn for
Michael
a given
Phelps.
effort. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Everyone's heard of that, and that's a good example. And so it's also something that I think your body does adapt to some measure. Browning of the fat on the neck, we see that basically infants have this kind of fat called brown fat, on the back of their neck when they're born, and it's keeping the blood warm. It also has some immune functions, the blood warm to the head. And basically, you lose this as we age, at least in modern society, probably because we don't do cold exposure. But a lot of metabolic benefits come with the browning of fat, which is interesting. And maybe being in water stimulates that. And I don't know about putting on more adipose mass, but it kind of makes sense as a buoyancy adaptation. So that's interesting.
Yeah. So what else do you have up your sleeve? You're looking at some of the newer diabetic meds that are the rave right now.
Yeah, I've been asking everyone I've been talking to on podcasts recently about what they think of the semaglutides and those incretin affecting drugs, and what they're doing for diabetics and weight loss. And I think, basically it's very promising, but I have a lot of open questions and skepticism surrounding why this is supposed to work the way it does. But I think it's still early days. We're gonna have to see in five years plus if they can, maintain these benefits while people don't really change their lifestyle, because that's the promise. And I think that's where it's gonna be hard. An adjunct is very different than a first and single modality of action.
Yeah, I would 100% agree, and I think that is the take home. That I've had a lot of discussions about that specific argument, saying, okay, if you don't change your lifestyle, for years when Western medicine would go, we'll just put you on insulin, you can eat whatever you want, right? And we killed everyone doing that. So you realize, okay, that's not the best way to go. As an adjunct, to say, okay, we're going to work on lifestyle too. And if we're metabolically healthier while we're going through that, I think we're going to do better. I think it's going to be the same thing as what we see in gastric bypass, where people do great for a while, but it's unsustainable because they start stretching their stomach back out. They start eating more. They figure out how to get around the system. And until we fix that root cause, we're never going to have success, because you can't take the drug the rest of your life. There's going to be side effects that are going to come up, or going to have some issues. But is it as a bridge? Is that where we use it, where it's effective? Say, okay, let's help you. If you're totally addicted to sugar and you can't get off it, maybe this will help with the cravings. Because I've seen some good
Mhm.
results, but you hate for that to be the sad part is, and we see it in medicine. Some of the people who are attacking us with looking at metabolic stuff are the ones who are pushing the drug right away and go, just give them the drug. That's all you need to do. But it's just like when people were saying, well, just take exogenous ketones and you'll lose weight and everything will be great. But
Right.
that's not a natural physiologic state to be in.
Hmm. And what have you seen? Because I've heard that a lot of doctors have seen that, clinics basically prescribe to 3/4 of the people walking in these new drugs, that they're becoming the standard of care even before they're the actual standard of care. So I don't know, what have you seen? What do you have patients asking you about it to be put on these drugs? Like what are you seeing?
Yeah, I've had that. As a matter of fact, it's funny. My office manager was just telling me, so we've had people walk in the door say, "Look, we want to put me on that drug, and I don't want to change my lifestyle." She's like, "You're not gonna be a good fit. It's not gonna work."
Right.
Because I think that's the stance we have to take is say, look, let's get some education. Let's talk about the seed oils, the things you're talking about. Let's talk about stress management. Let's talk about sleep. Just shooting something in your butt, you know, once a
Right.
week is not going to fix all the underlying problems that got us to where we're at. So
Yeah.
that's why in our practice, we do a lot of, group meetings, every 2 weeks we do a Zoom meeting where we all come in and talk and share about our struggles and what's working, what's not working, what are your tricks when you're craving sugar at night, those kind of things. And so that's really effective. And I think you need a community, and I think you can't just say I'm gonna, and it's the same, how it is. We don't want to, it's hard to change what we do. So for instance, the people who struggle with keto are the ones who come in and go, okay, I'm gonna have, low carb brownies, low carb cookies, low carb donuts, low carb this, and low carb pancakes every Friday. And you go, oh, it's gonna be a rough road for you.
Right.
You got to really change what you're doing. And so people who come and go, I like eating steak. Okay, cool. I don't have to have the fanciest meal every day. I could, and those people do really well. And so, and some people say, I don't want to exercise. Well, there's beneficial effects of exercise, not weight loss necessarily, but more so for increased muscle mass. We know that's one of the biggest indicators of longevity is having muscle mass, and not ending up in a nursing home. And so there's all these other things we have to look at. And so everyone wants the easy way out, say, okay, just shoot me up and let me go out and do what I'm doing. And I'm not going to give up anything I'm doing now. And I'm going to keep drinking every night. And, you start realizing it's going to be a dead end road, and they're going to spend a lot of money in the process.
Yeah, and patients should know that the drug was tested with a lifestyle and a dietary intervention. This was not just they took the drug and a placebo and did nothing else. So I think I mean, not that their intervention was so amazing that it's going to explain most of the results. I still think that's mostly down to the drug, but it does count for something. That's why we control for these interventions. So I think people should at least be aware of the results that are being sold. Don't come without an intervention that's in addition to the pill.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, it's funny because I had the same conversation with with a patient. I go, look, we had this discussion, and he said, oh, that's why when I took anabolic steroids, it didn't do anything because he took steroids, but he never worked out. You know what I mean? It's like even those
Right,
guys that
right.
we make fun of that are so
Yeah,
huge,
yeah,
like they're not just shooting steroids; they're working out too. They're doing
yeah.
lifestyle with that because it's not going to do anything at all if you're not working out. Testosterone being the same, testosterone may help with your exercise tolerance and your drive to exercise, but just taking testosterone sitting on the couch all day is not going to do a heck of a lot.
Yeah, that's very true. And I think another thing people should be aware of is that, so say you keep consuming seed oils, which contributed to your obesity, for which you're taking this drug. Well, okay, let's say it really does fix your obesity to some extent. The seed oils that you're consuming, they're still going to contain these contaminant levels of carcinogens. They're still going to contain these molecules called aldehydes, which result from the oxidation of linoleic acid. These things mess with mitochondria. They make fat cells bloat up. They're basically, they can cause a lot of what we would call metabolic syndrome, which is this constellation of symptoms, whether it's high blood pressure, big waist circumference, low HDL, high triglycerides, all of that stuff. So that's not going to magically change just because you lost some weight. I mean, it's great that you did, but you have to understand these things are major factors in the number one disease that's killing Americans and more, which is heart disease. So, this is, I think, the messaging that's being questioned at the moment is what can we, because when people see fat loss, they're going to assume all the benefits from the conventional way people lose fat. But losing fat, like you would lose with a patient who's doing a low carb diet, who's ditching seed oils, they're going to have massive benefits to their cardiovascular risk factors, massive benefits, right? Their ox-LDL is going to improve, the oxidized LDL, their triglycerides to HDL ratio is going to drop to really nice levels. But, if you're still consuming these seed oils or these flours, you're still going to get these other cardiovascular risk factors. They're going to be terrible, and you've got to be aware of that.
Exactly. And that's the thing is, it's funny, like, some people say, well, I watch out for my health, then they're smoking all day and they don't exercise. And you go, well, there's things we gotta, and maybe that's your advice and that's, you want to just do that. And okay, let's clean up all the other stuff. If you're going to drink, can we give up alcohol then? So it's one of those things, sometimes just finding that little common ground to say, okay, can we cut back? And then when people feel better, they go, man, I can exercise more and I don't get as tired. Then it becomes more of they enjoy it and they see the benefit. For instance, in clinic, really what I'm looking at is visceral fat. Some of us are just going to carry more subcutaneous fat, and that's the way it is. But the visceral fat. So, for instance, if someone goes and get liposuction, it actually increases your cardiovascular risk because there's anti-inflammatory effects of subcutaneous fat. So when you take that away, now what? When you get extra fat coming in, extra energy, then you have to store it in the visceral fat, which is pro-inflammatory and causes all these other issues, right? So that's one thing we could see, the visceral fat coming down a lot, even way before weight loss. I have people that have lost minimal weight, but they've decreased their visceral fat in half. Their insulin, A1C, everything gets better. But what's interesting is and I had to go through the literature and look at this because I was seeing it happen. Sean O'Mara has mentioned that too, doing imaging, saying, look, when you lose visceral fat, you put on muscle mass. Well, heck, if you put on muscle mass, who cares about the weight necessarily if you're putting on muscle and you're taking off visceral fat, right? It's a good trade-off.
Yeah, absolutely. And what kind of imaging is he doing when he's talking about that?
Yeah, he was doing CT scans. I'm using a Sika machine that looks at visceral fat, but it's bioimpedance. But seeing the actual images is very impressive because what he showed in his study, and I actually picked up the phone and called him when I was seeing this, because I have a guy who reverses diabetes with he went from 320 pounds to 316 pounds. Reverses diabetes at 316 pounds, right? But incredible. He goes, yeah, doc, I'm losing weight. And I go, I'm not losing weight, but I'm getting smaller. And his wife goes, look, because she goes, before I couldn't touch my fingers around his waist. Now I'm locking my wrists, and she goes, he's losing. And so we did his measurements. I'm like, you have. And it turns out he was losing visceral fat, but he was putting on muscle mass at the same time, right? Incredible. Because I think that's what happens as we get older. We lose muscle mass, we put on visceral fat. The visceral fat inhibits muscle mass. The muscle mass inhibits visceral fat. So people with a lot of muscle mass, when I see people with muscle mass, even though they may be 300 pounds, their visceral fat is generally very low compared to someone with no muscle mass. So muscle plays a huge role in this metabolic pathway, this interleukin 6, interleukin 10, to break down visceral fat.
Yeah, that's fascinating. People don't think of fat as being of having these roles that are it's really about energy partitioning and immune function. So my good friend Gabor always talks about immunometabolism, and I think it's this intersection where we can understand a lot of what you were just talking about, which is like visceral fat and muscle, and how these things are involved in sending the right signals out to your body, right? It's about energy partitioning. Obesity is not about calories, it's about how energy is partitioned. And if your gut is messed up, and you might start putting on a lot of visceral fat to bring it back to the gut, which we were talking about earlier. Visceral fat is in part an immune response from this dysbiosis that's occurring, and it's essentially a protective mechanism. Often that's what you're seeing with visceral fat. And when you can remove these triggers that are creating these gut permeability issues that are manifesting as this, increase in visceral fat, you can just lose that and then simply start putting on muscle mass because your body's starting to partition energy in a way that now makes sense. You've removed that problematic trigger. So it's Interesting to see you describe the seesaw action between them, where when one, visceral fat goes down, muscle mass goes up, and vice versa.
Yeah, so it'll be interesting when we get some good studies in. I don't think we have a lot of great data. Well, while we're on these topics, what's your opinion on fasting, like short-term fasting, time-restricted eating, and the effects on the gut microbiome and general health?
Yeah, I think fasting is, once again, one of my favorite tools because it's free. It's quite safe. It's widely applicable. You basically need a bit of education, maybe some salt, and that's about it. And then you just need to learn to handle the social awkwardness of having to fast and understand that even though it makes you different, that is not something that you should be too worried about. Because you're doing something that's very important, and that's also setting a good example for people. I think people should keep that in mind when they're doing something like that, because they're trying to reclaim their health. And fasting can help you do that because it removes food, and food is such a big problem nowadays. It contains so much of the problems that we're trying to remove, and it's a good way of giving your gut a rest and essentially resetting your immune system. That's one way to think about it. You can consume a lot of your gut lining and shake up these community of microbes and hopefully get them back to a place that they're gonna behave in your favor, essentially. And it's not just the stuff that's happening in your gut. Fasting is also about the stuff that's happening in your head. I think it's very, very educational to go without food for a while in a society that pushes you to consume multiple meals a day, maybe 5 meals a day, 6 meals a day. The stuff I see from nutritionists sometimes is astonishing. You're expected to eat as if you were grazing a field rather than, acting like this apex predator that you are, that has a nice big meal, between once, twice, maybe 3 times a day, and that's it basically. And you don't snack and you don't eat constantly. And you just fast every once in a while. Even for people who aren't overweight, fast for a day, fast for a weekend. It's good for your mental health. It breaks your routine up. Some people can't handle it if they have some metabolic issues or their fat tissue fails to liberate enough fat so that their brain can sense there's enough energy coming in. So there are, potential pitfalls, and some people need to supplement electrolytes because they lose a lot of electrolytes when they pee out the water that they're losing from not eating.
Because you're dropping your insulin level, which is making you hold on to sodium, and then you pee out the extra. Yeah. Do you think there's an optimal fasting regimen, like 3 days, and then where you may have diminishing returns, or causing long term? Because I've watched people who've done 30, 40-day fasts lose a lot of weight but gain it all back very quickly.
Yeah, I don't exactly. It's one of those situations where it's a powerful tool, but it's by definition unsustainable. So I think it's a punctuated tool. It's something that you should use occasionally, or in someone who can, like I was saying, who doesn't have these energy issues on it, or these too severe electrolyte issues on it. Most people can use it, and I think it's where you have to be a bit careful is people who are older, who are struggling to get enough protein, and then you're going to try to get them to fast. That seems like they're not going to improve their bone density, they're not going to improve their muscle mass, they're not going to improve their energy levels. In that case, fasting doesn't really make a lot of sense. But for so many people, it does. For so many people, it's such a great tool. So I think it's great. And yeah, there's these concerns about muscle mass loss in people who've undergone DEXA scans. So that's still an open question for me because I haven't performed one on myself. I haven't performed some on our patients yet. Hopefully we'll get to do that in the future and get a better idea of what really are the concerns and how much can you mitigate with resistance training, because it's abnormal not to resistance train from the perspective of your body.
And being in ketosis. Yeah, totally. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. So if you can resistance train, are you really gonna lose that much? Something tells me probably not.
Well,
we'll see.
And what's interesting too, Rafi, is that there's some like, for instance, in my patients, they'll come in and we put them on a low carb diet. They start working out hard, and they'll lose muscle mass, but we're looking at bioimpedance, but when you look at it, their muscles going from like a ribeye with a bunch of fat marbling down to a fillet, right? So initially it looks like so it'll be a curve, it'll come down like this, and then boom, it goes straight up, right? Because now they're really, once they burn out the fat in their muscle, now they can start adding more muscle into that tissue. And yeah, it's pretty amazing how the body works and how we misread some things sometimes. And we say, oh, you're losing muscle mass. Well, if you're losing fat in your muscle, then your muscle volume will go down a bit, but you're getting more lean muscle, to a degree. And it depends. It may be a 36-hour fasts are reasonable, then eat, feast and famine type thing, like Jason Fung would be talking about. So I think we have a lot to learn, but I think one thing that we can all agree on is that it's the energy excess that's the issue.
Yeah, you have this, you have this interesting thing where people say, oh, you can't, lose body fat and gain muscle, but actually, some people can. You do see, especially in people who have never trained before and who are still relatively young, who've got a hormonal setup that allows them to make those gains if they start resistance training and lowering their insulin and removing a lot of the junk food. So you can see that. I myself, when I started out on a lower carb diet years and years ago now, I went from about 74 kilos to about 80 kilos, and I went from eating 3 meals a day to 2. But I started resistance training, and I definitely lost percentage body fat. And when I was at around 80 kilos, in the end, I was around 10% body fat, let's say. So I know that that's possible, but I also know that when I was only eating 2 meals a day, I was struggling to gain extra muscle mass with all the CrossFit and resistance training that I was doing. So I added a third meal, basically. And now I'm at a good 85 kilos, where I feel I'm probably at my best, if I want to keep doing the kind of activities that I'm doing. So once people understand it's a tool, it's not a magical solution, then you can really use it in a way that's going to benefit you. Because I love eating only 2 meals a day. I'm okay eating 3 because it's great. I get to eat another meal with my wife and my friends. But I also know that, eating twice a day is fine. I'm probably going to do it. I do it every once a week by mistake. Basically, when I go running in the morning, I just don't have breakfast before. So I love to have that flexibility and to go back to it every once in a while.
Yeah, and maybe just changing it up and doing 2 meals one day, 3 meals one day, kind of change up how your body and you're listening to your body's demand and how you're feeling, how your muscles are doing and all that kind of stuff. Because the big thing is it's not a one size fits all. And like you had alluded to earlier, yes, if you have someone who's 450 pounds and their insulin level is 100, they're not going to be able to fast. They can. I mean, they can, but it's going to be a horrible torture.
Yeah, it might be hard.
Yeah. But if we start them out on a higher fat ketogenic diet for 2 weeks, and then all of a sudden, guess what? They go, oh, I didn't eat breakfast yesterday. I skipped lunch. They're not hungry, and they can't imagine that can be true, And so once they drop their insulin level down, that's why fasting, I think, it gets easier with time. So, after that second day of fasting, they're maybe more challenging. That third day, people are like, I wasn't even hungry at all. I wasn't even thinking about food anymore. Once you go through that certain stage where you have ketones, you have energy, and your body goes, okay, I'm fine, but your stomach's not hungry anymore. So maybe that's part of it, is that our insulin drops so dramatically in those first 2 or 3 days, that we can start, breaking down body fat and the mucus in the gut or whatever sitting around that we start living on. So yeah, it's really an interesting topic, because I know some people are very fearful of fasting. I have tons of people that come in, they go, I'm not going to fast. Okay, don't worry about it. Then 2 weeks in, they're like, oh, I skipped lunch yesterday. No big deal. I forgot about it, And so it's kind of cool where it's a weird thing for people when they're hungry all the time not to be hungry.
Yeah, so I'm sure you've tried fasting already, Brian. And I know that the first time I did a long fast, so a 5-day fast, I remember having dreams about food, and my mind was so preoccupied, was so used to thinking about food, right? When am I going to shop? What am I going to cook? I have to clean this. I have to, get this, and it's in the back of your mind. And when you fast, you're just free of this, of these preoccupations for a while, and it's kind of interesting. I think it's psychologically interesting for people to explore how they react to it. They might be surprised, and they'll probably learn something. So I think it's valuable even just for that.
Yeah, and I think for that, just of not having and for me, I never plan on doing a longer fast, and I haven't fasted in a while. So my wife and I were just talking about this yesterday, as a matter of fact. She just got a book called Fast Like a Girl, and it's like, do you know who that is? I hadn't heard of it, but anyway, she goes, and so we were listening to it yesterday. I go, and she's right on. I mean, everything I've heard so far is right on. And I go, that'd be cool. Let's do it together. That'd be fun. And so, but what's funny is I never set out to do, I go, I'll just fast today. And I go, I'll skip dinner. Okay, I'll eat lunch
Right.
tomorrow. Then, I'm not really hungry. I'll wait till dinner tonight. And so you can extend it, because mentally say I'm not going to eat for 4 days is overwhelming. But to say, okay, let's just kind of see how it goes. And I think a lot of people are rigid in
Mhm.
there. They go, I said 3 days, I'm doing 3 days, and they're miserable the whole
Right.
time. It's like, well, cut back and
Yeah.
do what works for you. Listen to your body too, and what your muscle demands are, and what your physical activity, stress level, sleep, all these things are factors that will affect. And for me, really, the limiting factor for me is after a 3-day fast, I get really cold. My hands and feet start getting cold, and
Yep.
I don't sleep at
Yep.
all. I wake up at 2 in the morning. I'm like, oh gosh, I'm awake,
Right.
but I'm not
Yeah.
tired.
Wired.
I'm just awake.
Right. Right. Yeah, that's interesting. I got cold as well. I remember that. And you're just yeah, you're just conserving energy. You can feel that state. But it can be also very pleasant. There are people who fast for religious reasons because it brings them closer to a state of mind where they feel more in touch with whichever deity they believe in, or whichever force they relate to. And it's really interesting how it can clear the mind. And I think that's why it's probably good for mental health, right? It helps give some peace and stability there. If you can get through some of that discomfort that is typical but surmountable.
Well, and I'm so glad you brought that up, because it was in the back of my brain. I wasn't going to say it unless you brought it, but yeah, I've looked at that for a long time, because fasting, if you look at I'm a Christian guy. So when you look and you go, the church, when they used to pray and fast, radical things happened. But now it's like, we can't fast. We're used to eating cookies and donuts all the time. Like all the church functions, the hospital functions, all it is junk food. So if you try to fast, it's a penance. Like you're suffering. So you're not seeking
Right.
God because you're suffering, thinking my stomach hurts, I'm miserable, I'm gonna die. But when people are in a like, if someone who's on a ketogenic diet fast, it's like a spiritual, like you grow closer to God. Plus, you're not distracted by going, okay, I got, like you said, cleaning dishes, I got to go shopping, I got to do this stuff. It frees you from all that stuff, at least temporarily. But
Yeah.
it is really remarkable that if certain groups would fast, you do grow closer to God, or you feel this peace and presence that you don't feel when you're eating crap food all the time.
Right. And there's something about the gratitude that you have where you learn to appreciate the food that you do have, because you've gone a while without it. And I think even if you're not very, very poor, there are ways where you should be able to appreciate your food. And I think we just order off a click of a button. We don't think about it twice. And sometimes it's good to remember that no, there are animals that come into the process. There's a lot of work that gets into it. I have an amazing set of choices in front of me. Let me make the best choice I can. So whether that's enjoyment, but also for my health. So there are all these things that come into it. And when you have no food, well, that's when you're reminded of it. Scarcity can can sometimes work magic on our mind.
Well, it's funny you bring it up, and the first thing that came to my mind, I spent some time in Cuba doing a medical trip down there, and it was remarkable talking to the guys, because these guys are just happy and full of faith. And I go, how do you guys have such faith, and how do you guys like so happy all the time? And I'm like, I'm looking at, they get like a bag of rice every month, and then some beans or whatever. And the answer was, they said, we have to live by faith, because we're happy that we get food, whatever we get. He said, you Americans will say, oh, not Mexican tonight, I had that yesterday. No, I want to, you know what I mean? And
Right.
we have such an abundance of everything. If you want any type of food, you can either order it, have it delivered to your door. You don't have to do anything. You don't have to cook. You don't have to, and it's everywhere. You could, just in my town, I could see, 5 Thai restaurants sitting there, and you go, wow, like that many people are eating out all the time. All these restaurants are being supported, you know? And so,
Hmm.
yeah, I think it's just really an interesting idea of it's, and it's interesting. The thing that always comes up, if you mention fasting to a nutritionist, generally, or a dietitian, they're gonna say, well, that's cause of eating disorder. That's disordered
Right.
eating. But if you're eating cookies, everything in moderation is like, some people can't moderate. They can't.
Hmm.
You give them one cookie and they cannot
Absolutely.
stop. It's a drug, and they need that dopamine hit and that insulin hit and triglyceride hit in the brain, and then you get in that cycle, and it's hard to break.
Yeah, no doubt. I think these things where we learn to go without, where we learn to be flexible, because we talk about metabolic flexibility, but it's also social flexibility, when you can unintentionally skip a meal because you're doing great work and you're really into it, and you just skipped your meal, and you're fine. You're in a good state of health. So I think those things are great, and it's also with temperature. We have central heating. It's a very modern, very recent invention that's very widespread now, and it's great. It's fantastic. It's saved lives. It's part of the improvements of society that mean people don't get as many colds in winter and die of pneumonia. I mean, central heating is incredible, but expose yourself to the cold. Learn to go without the heat. Learn to be comfortable in the discomfort and reap a lot of benefits. And once again, it's not just that you'll be more resistant to viruses, or you'll have a stress relief. It's also the fact of appreciating the warmth when you've been in the cold. And trust me, if you've been in the cold, you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah. And the other thing is, and I know Wim Hof has talked about this also, is when you're in ice water, you're not thinking about paying your taxes. You're not thinking about what you're doing next week. You're just trying to say, how do I stay warm? How do I calm my body? How do I keep my heart rate down? Your respiratory rate and all those things. And you're in the moment for sure.
Yeah, it's a great equalizer. Rich, poor, black, white, man, woman, doesn't matter. The cold is cold for everyone, and I really love it because it gives people. I think first of all, it's playful, it's fun, challenge people to try it out, and people say, I could never do it. And then they manage to do it, and they're happy. It gives them an energy boost after they do it. They're usually in great mood. They're usually laughing after that. So, it's something the people should consider as a daily practice. If it's, not ice baths, cold showers for most people. So yeah, give it a try.
Yeah, and you could even do it unintentionally if someone flushes the toilet like we do at home sometimes. Like you're like, oh my gosh, who flushed the toilet? It's freezing, or it got really hot all of a sudden.
Yeah.
But I think all those things. I mean, I think I love what you're doing and your approach, and I love your. What's interesting? Actually, I saw you post something. I haven't seen your post in months and months.
Mm-hmm.
It's weird because I think
Oh,
some
really?
of us just don't see each other, and it's so odd to me that I've had friends say, "Where the heck have you been?" I was like, "I've been here. I've been yapping too much," but it's really weird. I've noticed certain people that I just never see what they put on there.
Yeah, no, I know what you mean. It has happened with certain people where I even had to follow them back. Their stuff wasn't appearing in my timeline anymore, and I think there's a lot of shenanigans around that shadow banning and that sort of stuff. So it probably does, come back to something like that, unfortunately.
Yeah, there's some weird hocus pocus stuff happening.
Yeah.
So what other words of wisdom do you have for us while I got you stuck here?
Well, I would just love to tell people, if they're in Portugal, especially Lisbon, please check us out if you want to engage with medical and health professionals that know about metabolic health and lifestyle interventions, and they can help you come off. We can help you come off drugs or get onto better ones that are more appropriate. Make sure that you're taken care of, that you're doing preventative medicine if that's what you're interested in. So please come check us out. It's Clínica Pêro, P-E-R-O, .pt. So that I would love to encourage people to do that. But the other thing I would like to let people know about is just that there's a really simple thing they can do if they're trying to improve their health, and that's trying to understand how to basically how to wrap their head around a lot of medical science. I think it's a really big concern for a lot of people nowadays, especially after COVID, and everybody was thrown in the deep end in trying to understand how to act around a virus, how to change their habits according to the health needs that they have. So I think if people can learn to maybe follow some science journalists, understand how a study is done, the basics of it really, I think it'll really help them navigate what's a very difficult subject like nutrition or respiratory viruses and stuff like that. So I want to give people a break because it's a really difficult topic, but at the same time I want to encourage them to try to learn more about it. So that's my words of wisdom is try to learn more about these things.
Yeah, it's hard because most of us just don't. I mean, I hate going through the details of studies and trying to figure out how they're doing shenanigans. It's really, but sometimes you see it, it's so obvious, and you see some trends where all these certain papers are published on the same topic that may be questionable quality, as far as they're pushing the agenda rather than the science. It's so hard because there's so many things that we've heard. I mean, I think an example, we could throw up quote after quote after quote, which was inaccurate or absolutely, there's no data to support the statements. And everyone said, yeah, this is true. And if you question it, you were crazy. Right. So it's a hard thing because you don't want to be just most people aren't arbitrary that want to get into fights with everyone without having knowledge. But some people say, look, I've looked at the data and here's what it shows. And here's what we're seeing clinically, by the way. And so it's a hard one because I know even what you mentioned, I've had several people after a salad, they go, all I had was a salad, their sugar spikes like crazy. And so it could be the seed oil. It could be that there was extra sugar in that whatever, and I think it's somewhere like 95% of, products on the market are all just highly processed seed oils for, if you just buy, if you make your own dressing, you're going to be way better off, little things like that you can do.
Yeah. I think, no, I think people need a lot of practical advice and to understand the spirit of science even more than the details. So to make sure they're not listening to people who make arguments by authority, but who take the time to lay out their argument clearly in a way that you can engage with and verify for yourself if at all possible. So learn to trust the people who are going to give you something to wrestle with, and rather than just push back degrees or authority statements, basically. So I think, and it's hard for people because authority has a lot of weight for us in how we make decisions, and sometimes we're really lost and we want to be reassured by authority, but it's generally false hope. So take responsibility for your health and just ask a lot of questions. There are smart people out there willing to help you, so seek them out. Don't be shy about firing any doctor that's not engaging with you, answering your questions, treating you like you're a smart person who can figure things out for yourself.
Yeah, and observe what you're seeing in yourself. If you start eating a certain way and you feel terrible all the time and nothing's going right, you say, okay, maybe I need to readjust, and maybe change tact or add this in or take this out or, exercise more, sleep more. So it's just tweaking the little levers that we can over time, I think is really important, So how do people track you down if they want to hear more of you?
I'm on Twitter at Raphael S7, so Raphael S7. They can follow Clínica Pêro on Instagram. So we post a lot of content there. They can check out ZeroAcreFarms.com for low linoleic acid oil alternative. And basically, I'm also working on designing a new and improved infant formula, because a lot of what's on the market is, as we talked about, is full of seed oils and low quality plant proteins. So I'm also working with a company to bring a better product to the market. Hopefully we can get babies some better food.
No, that's awesome. That's important stuff, especially here in the US where we had a baby food shortage. I was like, man, that might be a good thing actually with what they're giving them. But if we have good products like what you're talking about, that's huge. I mean, you want to start the babies off right, and you want to give them the best neural functioning and energy that they can. So that's awesome, man.
Yeah, look forward to it, and hopefully when the project moves forward more, I'll be able to share more details about that with you guys.
All right, sounds good. Hey, thanks so much for joining me. And everyone,
Thanks.
hey, thanks, Patreon supporters. Thanks for your support. Everyone who's kind of stuck with us through these last 4 years of craziness. And it's all worth it when we get great guests like this. So, Rafi, thanks for joining me. It's great to see you,
Thanks
man.
so much, Brian. Thanks. It was great.